to me, and looking around, I think I might be one of the older people in the room. To me, this policy is new. The first couple of jobs I had, my employer did not have to check my name against my Social Security number, did not have to check my immigration bona fides. It was in 1986. I'd had a couple of jobs by that time. I can keep a job, I've now proven. But in 1986, Congress passed the Immigration Reform and Control Act, which actually was the first iteration of a federal law that tried to use internal enforcement of immigration law to curtail immigration. IRCA created the I-9 form, which is something you're probably all familiar with, requiring employers to collect, to look at the driver's license and the Social Security card of the new hire, collect that information and basically put that information in a form somewhere. The law made it illegal to knowingly hire illegal immigrants. Over the course of the next 10 years, that law didn't change very much, and Congress revisited internal enforcement in 1996 in the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act. What matters for these purposes in that law was that it created a system called Basic Pilot. Basic Pilot took the next step after the I-9 and created a program for checking the name and Social Security number against federal government data. So a user of Basic Pilot, having collected the name and Social Security number of the worker, would then call up and say, I have this new worker. They would check in with the government to see that the name and the SSN actually matched. That provides some value, though not a lot, because we've seen that immigration rates illegal immigration rates have continued at about the same rates. There's rather widespread, always has been rather widespread non-compliance. But Basic Pilot, originally not an online system because online really didn't exist back then, was converted into or renamed as electronic EEV, and then subsequently to that renamed to EVerify, which is good branding on an old concept of just checking the name against the Social Security number. Newer iterations, the next step in trying to quote-unquote improve this system, involve gathering more information about workers so that more checks can be done. There's also already a photo enforcement tool where workers who are using some kind of federal documentation, for example, if they're a legal immigrant, they have a green card, the EVerify system will show a picture to the employer, and the employer is supposed to review the picture against the person standing there and make sure that the picture is of the person that's coming to work for them. And we can predict that efforts to further strengthen, quote-unquote, or improve EVerify will result in more collection of more information. There's already a program in place that some states are signing up to where they're sharing their driver's license data with the federal government so that that can be used for these new worker background checks. Let me talk to you about this. So that's really a brief, skipping over the top of the development of this policy. Let me talk to you about it in the abstract just a little bit and describe why it concerns me, why this trajectory of the policy concerns me and should concern you and your bosses. Work is valuable. Work is how we support ourselves, and work is how we support our families. So just like native-born workers and legal immigrants, illegal immigrants very much want to work, and that's what brings most of them to our shores. In order to stave this off in 1986, the policy of internal enforcement of immigration law took working. Working was previously a thing anyone who was willing could do. If you wanted to work and you found an employer willing to use your labors, you could work. It took that natural right of the employer and employee to get together and made it into a federal right, a federally administered right. And the only way to administer that right is to have federal records about people and requiring employers to check against those federal records who's permitted to work. I've often said that the framers of the Constitution would spin in their graves to think that the federal government would decide who's allowed to work and who's allowed to hire whom. But the early policy of collecting a name and a Social Security number created a little bit of a bar to people who were not legally in the United States. They had to come up with a name and a Social Security number. It's not that hard. Names are pretty easy to invent, and Social Security numbers are too. You just have to have the right number of numbers in what you provide to the employer. With the extension of the policy to basic pilot, workers going to work for employers who were participating in basic pilot had to do a little bit more. They had to come up with a name and Social Security number pair that matched. That's hard, but it's not so hard that if you're going to make $30,000 more per year for doing so, you're not going to do it. And so the very, very simple identity fraud of creating a Social Security number now became a slightly more complex identity fraud of accessing somewhere a name and number that match. And that's basically the policy we have today, though the push in EVerify is to make it national, so that every employer and every worker will have to participate. And workers who aren't legally in the country will have to slightly deepen their identity frauds. They'll have to come up with a name and Social Security number pair that match, and probably because the system will search for this kind of thing, multiple uses of the same name and SSN pair, they'll probably have to come up with slightly original names and SSN pairs that haven't been used many, many times before. Believe me, because of the value of working, they will deepen their identity frauds. You'll find a situation sometime not too far in the future, should this policy go forward, where identity fraud gets to the point that there will be a real contest between the person whose true identity it is and the person who's using that identity somewhere else in the world. You, some of your constituents, someone you know, might find that your identity is so thoroughly taken that you can't prove better than the other person can prove that you're who you say you are. That's a little difficult, but it's a difficulty that people trying to work in the United States and people who are less well educated than all of us in this room, in poorer circumstances than we are, will have to face themselves. So EVerify and this policy threaten our privacy, threaten the integrity of our identities, and ultimately the best system, the ideal system if you want EVerify to work, as I suggested at the outset, is to have a national ID system, to have cradle-to-grave biometric tracking so that you really can prove who you say you are. But once you have that administrative system in place, it may be put in place for purposes that you think are good, but it may well be used for purposes that you don't think are good. So if you really, really want to see strong internal enforcement of immigration laws, watch for that national ID system to be used to control your access to housing, or to control your access to health care, or to control your access to guns and ammo, prescriptions, and a variety of other goods and services in our society. All of those things I listed have already been proposed for national ID systems in the United States. Bruce Schneier, who's I think an excellent computer security guru, whose thinking extrapolates out to other areas, said, and I'll misquote him obviously, that it's poor civic hygiene to create technologies that could be used for tyranny. I don't believe that the U.S. faces tyranny anytime in the near future, but our distant future is uncertain. And it would be a terrible mistake, where no matter where you stand on immigration policy, to create a national ID system for one purpose and see it used for unfortunate purposes sometime in the future. Thanks very much.